Okay, so we've seen Konrad Lorenz there, who discovered that nidifugus birds, such as ducks, geese, so on, have a simple mechanism, quick and dirty mechanism for learning what members of their own species like, particularly what their mum looks like, because the mum is going to be the thing that protects them, and they need to follow that individual around. But it can go wrong because basically the mechanism is that pretty much the first thing that you see when you hatch is going to be your mother. And obviously, if it's not the mother, then that can lead to problems. What about humans? Well, humans seem to have some kind of innate basis for preferring faces. And in the 1990s, Mark Johnson and John Morton proposed a theory which says that basically there are two processes: there's conspec and conlearn. Conspec is an innate, sketchy representation of what faces look like, and conlearn is kind of like a mechanism which fleshes those details out as a result of experience. So here's the study that they did, and again, what was done here was that babies, newborn babies, and 5-week-old babies, 10-week-old babies, 19-week-old babies, etc., were presented with two things to look at. One of them, as you can see here, looks a bit like a face. It's a kind of sketchy cartoon face. It's got eyebrows, a nose, mouth, and so on. Or this thing here, the second one, which is a very schematic, rough picture of a face with just dark patches where the eyes and mouth are. Eyes, nose, stroke, mouth are. Then they were presented with this kind of scrambled face, which has got all the bits of the one on the left, but they're all jumbled up. And then we've got this rather weird thing, which looks like some kind of alien, for want of a better word. The results are fairly clear, but a little bit strange in places. What we can see that 5-week-old babies, the youngest babies, they've actually done this in newborns too, but this data particularly looks at 5 weeks. We can see that babies very much prefer looking at the real face here to this scrambled face. So this difference between here and here is significant. But there's no significant difference between a real face and a primitive face. There's a slight preference, but it's not a reliable difference. There's no significance there. Weirdly, they also kind of like looking at the alien face. Now, whether that's evidence of, that babies were put together by aliens and are inseminated into people, no idea. Best guess is that's just some kind of preference for complexity, because it's quite a complex picture. But also it does look weird, but there is a certain face likeness to it. At least the eyes, although they're at the bottom, are parallel with each other. So there's a preference for there's a preference for face-like things over unface-like things, but there's no distinction between primitive and more realistic faces. And this is conspec. Okay, so we have a sketchy idea in our heads of what faces look like. Pretty quickly, conlearn kicks in. So conspec is basically a mechanism which says, look at faces, they're cool. And as a result of looking at faces, babies learn about them. So by 10 weeks of age, babies are started to prefer looking at realistic faces to primitive faces, and the preference for these other things is even lower. By 19 weeks, they had enough, really. They don't care. I mean, they've learned all they need to know about faces, and these particular primitive things aren't terribly interesting. They still like looking at faces, but they have to be real people rather than these pretend faces. So this is a mechanism for kids. The perils of screencasting. Somebody just walked in on me. Okay, so this is just a mechanism which allows babies to recognize, to learn about people, and particularly important people. This also seems to be happen in non-human primates, such as what people sometimes call monkeys. Funnily enough, if you give pictures of monkey faces, these are real pictures of monkey faces, to babies, 6-month-old infants, they was good at discriminating monkey faces as human faces. Okay, so if you give pictures of 2 people or 2 monkeys, human babies are as good as that, as they are human faces. This disappears by 9 months. So presumably this is again learning. We're starting to learn human faces, which is starting to overwrite this ability to discriminate between monkey faces. And we also find that certain monkeys are good at discriminating human faces and monkey faces. I guess it's exactly the same as infants. Again, this disappears later in life. So it could be suggested this mechanism isn't actually something that predates humans. So it could be going back many millions of years when the common ancestor of human and monkeys, or possibly even before. And the reason why we think this is because exactly this phenomenon that babies and human babies and monkey babies seem to have exactly the same ability. As we talk about recognizing particular people, by 4 months, babies are preferring to look at their mother's face or the primary caregiver's face. Could be the father, but the person who they see the most. But even at 4 months, this is fairly sketchy. So if a woman wears, for example, in this study, the baby would prefer looking at the mother to a different woman. But if the mother and the different woman both wore swimming hats, then they couldn't tell them apart. There was no preference there. So this is something which babies have some ability in, but it's not yet as good as the ability of an adult or an older child who could presumably tell the mother with or without a swimming hat. Okay, so that's kind of talking about innate stuff with a bit of learning thrown in there, showing that maybe babies are pre-wired to learn about things more rapidly. So learning is given a head start by having some basic innate principles in there. On the next screencast, I'll tell you about a thing where we consider development not as the infant being pounded into shape by the environment, but considering it as being almost like a process of active decision making with particular developmental trajectories wired in by natural selection. So that's the next one.